video is turned off. Your video is turned off. However, if you have any questions, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box along with your name and the name of your business and the chat box. Our housekeeping rules, Christina.
Think you're a
So let
slide
me,
back,
before I
right?
get to there, let me just let you meet the team for just some of our newcomers today. My name is Ruth Jordan. I will be your moderator. I'm the manager over the City of Charleston's Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise. Christina Ott will be providing technical support for us. She's our new business service manager with Business and Neighborhood Services. And we have a great presenter tonight, Mrs. Danisha L. McClary. And she's an attorney and CEO of McClary Consulting, LLC. And I'll be introducing her formally in just a few moments. In terms of housekeeping, this presentation is being recorded and will be available on YouTube. Also, our previous sessions are also recorded and is available. As participants, your video and audio is off. However, we love participations. So we would ask you to please use the Q&A box. All right, let's get started. So again, this is part 3 of the 4-part series. We started this September 7th. We did Why Be Certified. And as a result of this, we've had several of you submitted your certification applications, and I've had an opportunity to speak to some of you. And then we had Federal Contracting 101 with SBA last week. And tonight we have Understanding the Scope and Winning the Contract. And then finally, next Wednesday, our final series will be I Won the Contract, Now What? How do I get paid? But more importantly, how do I continue to win contracts? And so our presenter tonight, and I'd like to call her a panel expert, is Mrs. Danisha L. McClary. She has a master's in law and government contracts with the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General Legal Center. She's a business consultant, a certified grant writer, a certified credit consultant. She has experience in government contracts in the federal, state, and local. She has various degrees, as you might imagine. She has a BS degree from Florida A&M. She has a master's degree from Troy State University. And of course, her JD is from the University of Georgia. And I like what she says in her bio. Since its inception, McClary Consulting has been strategically focused on helping minority-owned, women-owned, and veteran-owned businesses build strong brands and secure lucrative opportunities. I presented some and introduced others. Our panel expert for tonight, attorney Danisha McClary. It's yours, Mrs. Danisha.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jordan, for the introduction, and thank you so much, Ms. Off. Thank you to the City of Charleston for the invitation to sit as a panelist for tonight's discussion. It is my distinct pleasure to present to this group because I feel like I'm a part of this group. I, as you can see, am a woman, I'm a minority, and as Ms. Jordan pointed out, I am also a business owner, a small business owner, and I, in my business, pursue government contracts. And so tonight, I'm going to discuss with you what the topic of this discussion, of course, is understanding the scope and winning the contract. And I'm gonna really get into the nuts and bolts of what that actually means. And I'm the type of person, I have a very participatory type style of discussion. I don't like to feel like I'm teaching. I like to feel like we're sharing information because undoubtedly there are people on this call who have some level of experience. Even if you are not as experienced as someone else in this group, there's likely something that you can share. And so I invite you all to participate. I've prepared a few slides for us tonight, not too many because we only have an hour, and in an hour, there's no way we could become experts on any of this stuff. But what we can do is make sure that we get some of the basics down. And so I understand that if you have been participating in this series already, you've already had a Government Contracting 101 with the SBA, which is an overview of the contracting process. And so most often that covers registration requirements for how do I become eligible to even bid and do business with the government. So at this stage, you're past the registration requirement and you're trying to figure out, how do I get one of these lucrative contracts like I hear so many people talking about? Now, I'm a proponent of government contracting for small businesses, for minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and veteran-owned businesses, because I'm all of those things. But also because I believe that it can change the trajectory of a small business. For instance, since 2001, I have had a total now of 6 government contracts, 1 with the Department of the Army, 2 with the state of South Carolina, 1 with Richland County. This one tonight, actually, I'm appearing before you tonight as a government contractor. My company was contracted to provide these services. And I just yesterday actually received another order from the state of South Carolina to provide government contracting services. Now, when I say that this provides a lucrative opportunity to small businesses, I just want to point out one of the contracts that I have with the state of South Carolina. I have 2 5-year contracts with the state of South Carolina. Just one of those contracts has an annual face value amount of $150,000. So as you can imagine, for a small business, this can mean the difference between, being solvent and being unsolvent, right? So I'm one of those people in my consulting firm. I'm going to put up my slides in a minute, and y'all forgive me because I can talk. Y'all heard her say I was a lawyer, right? So I can talk sometimes. So please forgive me if I'm talking too much in the intro. But this is so important. Like I can't drive it home enough. So I think it's worth stating. But as you can imagine, for a small business, in my consulting firm, I help people start businesses. I help people start nonprofits. In fact, I started a nonprofit like 2 years ago, and in July I received a government grant, because I'm also a grant writer, and I received a government grant, and for $59,000 to run emergency rental assistance clinics in the county that I live in. So there are all kinds of opportunities in the government marketplace, and like you heard from the SBA presentation, the same registration that is required for you to do business with the federal government is also required to get federal grants awards. So those types of things, those are gems. I don't know if you guys discussed that or not in your last presentation, but I just wanted to put that out there. But it's not enough for small businesses to start. Many of us have family and friends who start businesses, but those businesses never really get off the ground. It's important that you understand how to make sure your business is sustainable. And doing business with the government is the largest marketplace in the world. And they need everything that a household needs. They need everything that a business needs. And so I cannot say how much that I am a proponent of small businesses doing business with the government. And so that's why I think this class is important, and why I think this entire series is important, and why I think it's such an amazing job that Ms. Jordan and Ms. Off and the folks in the city of Charleston are doing, providing this type of training for small business. So without further ado, I'm just gonna move into our slides, because like I said, we only have an hour. Right now, because I'm sharing my screen, I want to make sure, can you all see my screen? Thank you so much. Thank you. Now, I can't see any chats, so I'm going to be completely dependent on Ms. Off and Ms. Jordan for anyone who is submitting chats while I have my screen share up. But I do invite you to participate, and I will ask questions, because again, the purpose of this is so that we share information and that we grow together. Okay. So also, I have on here just a link for some free information. I have a fledgling YouTube channel. I hardly ever post anything, but what I do have posted are seminars and things that I have done with the Small Business Administration. And that's a lot of wonderful free information that you might be able to use. And so please, don't hesitate to look me up on YouTube and check that out. Again, you guys already heard about my background. And again, what I want to stress is not all of this stuff about me in my military career, with the exception of the fact that I have a background in government contracts and fiscal law. And so I advise the government and government contracting officers on government contracts, on the correct funds to use for them, on the right clauses to have in those contracts. And so I have seen government contracting from both sides. In austere environments, I deployed to Iraq for 15 months where I did government contracting. I actually was the legal advisor for the Coalition Acquisition Review Board, where billions of dollars in government contracts, I sat as the legal advisor for those contracts in support of operations in that environment. So when I say that I know firsthand how lucrative this can be for small businesses, I am not kidding, okay? But like you, I'm an active government contractor. Some people, who will teach classes and give information are not actually having the same struggle you're having. They're not actually competing in the environments that you're competing in, but I am, because in my small business, not only do I help small business owners and nonprofits, but I actively compete and win government contracts. And so I want to make sure that you understand that I understand where how tough it can be to get started. And if you have any questions of me at any time, please don't hesitate to ask during this presentation. So today we're going to talk, this is the agenda that we're going to cover. I'm not really a person who likes to read slides to people. Like I said, I like to be face-to-face and I like to be participatory. But there are some things that I want to point out as we go through these slides. We're going to talk about, in order for you to really understand the scope of a contract, which is why we're here today, you got to understand what it means to be responsive. And so we're going to talk about responsiveness and why it matters. And then we're going to look at different types of solicitations. I have highlighted here on this slide the two most common types that if you're bidding in the federal or bidding in South Carolina on state contracts, the two most common that you will see. But we'll go over requests for quotes or requests for informations as well, because if you are properly registered to do business with the federal government in the SAM website, like you may have heard the SBA presentation discuss, then you will receive requests for quotes or requests for information from contracting officers, even if you have never reached out to their offices. And so we'll kind of talk about that as well. So then we're going to do a review of all of the sections that's in a federal request for a proposal, and then the sections in a South Carolina invitation for a bid, because those are likely going to be the two most common that most folks are going to encounter on this journey. But before we do that, we're going to also talk about formatting your bid packet, like just little tips to look out for after you kind of understand what's in the proposal. Before we get to the next slide, though, can I just ask someone to tell me if they've looked at any solicitations? How many of you are experienced with going through solicitations and submitting bids? Anyone in the chat?
Adam Montgomery said yes. Abigail says yes.
Adam and Abigail.
Melvin, Stephanie. Yeah, so we got 8, 9.
Oh, this is really, really awesome. I
10,
wish
11.
Oh my goodness, this is wonderful. Because we could have, in a perfect world where there were no COVID and all of these things, we could have really had a very interactive discussion, because I'm certain that there are gems that you guys have learned along the way that you could share.
Some said they looked at it but did not submit. But probably was complicated. It seemed complicated. So some said they reviewed them but never took the final step in submitting.
Okay, so what we're going to aim to do tonight is to demystify some of that complication, because you're right. When you look at a solicitation for the first time, it can be somewhat intimidating, because, for example, a federal solicitation can literally be anywhere from 40 to hundreds of pages. And Ms. Jordan was just telling me tonight that you guys were working on a solicitation, Ms. Jordan, and it's very complex.
Yes.
So if you're doing this for the first time and you don't know where to start, it all looks like boilerplate language. For those of you who are not familiar with the term boilerplate, you know, like when you go and you purchase medicine from the drugstore and there are these little leaflets that are stuck in there and there's this little fine print and stuff. That's what we consider in the legal community boilerplate language. Most people never read the boilerplate language. Most people are just looking for, how many do I take? Like what, where's the chart that tells me for my age or my weight or whatever, how many of these things I'm supposed to take? And most people stop there. And so solicitations can be daunting and they can seem overwhelming. And for that reason, a lot of people don't take the plunge. But I want to make sure that if I don't do anything else tonight, that I give you enough information where you feel like you can at least sit with the solicitation, sit with these slides, because the purpose of these slides, you'll see as we go through them, is for you to have something to use when you're sitting down and you're starting the process and you're starting to really try to get a handle on it. And we'll talk about some of the sections that are in the solicitation by in order of how they appear. And I've also highlighted, you'll see when we go through this, some of those sections, because some of them are going to be ones that you might want to look at before you read some of the ones that appear earlier in the solicitation. Okay. Does anyone have any questions of me before we begin?
Put it in the Q&A box. Seeing or hearing none.
Okay. So let me ask you guys a question. When you see on this slide that we're going to talk about responsiveness and why it matters, can someone tell me what they believe I might be talking about when I say responsiveness? We're talking about solicitations. We're talking about understanding the scope so that you can win a contract. So when I say responsive, what does that mean to you?
Abigail Mitchell says, how do you see what is the best fit for you? Let me see, finish reading, I'm sorry. Somebody says date due. How do you see what is best fit for you before you do it? Actively staying involved in the process. Boy, they're jumping around. We'll hold it
Timely
up.
responses, whenever the government asks for something, provide it.
There you go.
That's
there
right.
you go. These are all excellent answers, and they all relate to responsiveness. So when I say that your bid has to be responsive, so when you read a solicitation, and we're going to talk about what a solicitation is, but when you read a solicitation, in order for the government to even take you seriously, in order for them to even consider your bid, that bid has to be what is known as responsive in the government contracting community. And responsiveness means that you provide all the information that they ask for, you answer any questions that they ask, and you address the problem that the government is trying to solve. So when you look at a solicitation, think of it as the government has a problem, right? They need services, or they need supplies, or they need something. And they're looking for someone who can solve that problem. And so if the government says, hey, I am a federal women's prison and I need someone who can provide undergarments for women for this federal women's prison that meet certain specifications, and they tell you how many they're going to need, and they tell you all of these things, and you submit a response to the government that includes a quote for providing bedroom slippers, it may or may not be responsive. If your quote only includes the bedroom slippers, it is not responsive, because that's not what they asked you for, right? What did they ask for? They asked about undergarments, right? So if your quote addresses the undergarments, then and it answers any other questions or address any other problems the government had, then that bid is considered responsive. The reason this is important is because if you do not answer the questions that are asked, if you do not provide a solution to the problem that is presented, if you do not provide all of the information that is requested, what happens to your bid?
Gets thrown out?
Yeah. The government is not going to even take you seriously. They're going to say, this person cannot even answer these questions, right? So if you can't even answer these questions that I have so that I understand that you're able to provide me with what I need, I do not care that you might be the lowest bidder. I do not care that you might provide all of these additional options. If you can't provide me with what I need, then I'm not going to consider your bid, right? So if you took your car in for an oil change, and instead of getting an oil change, the person behind the counter wanted to sell you tires, would you feel like they had addressed your needs? Probably not, right? You still need an oil change. You came in for an oil change. Now, if they provide you with an oil change and then they offer you the sale of tires, and you might be in the market for tires, that's different, right? But if all you needed was an oil change, it does not matter that they have the cheapest tires in town, does it? Not at all.
Nope.
And so that's how these things work. So responsiveness is a kind of a term of art in the contracting profession. And so you need to remember that term, and you need to remember what it means. Now, you don't have to remember it because, like I said, I'm not certain, Miss Jordan, are you guys providing them with the slides afterwards? If not, it's going to be
Yeah,
recorded,
the slides
right?
will be made available on our website.
Okay.
It's archived on our website.
Okay, so you don't have to necessarily remember any of the things that I'm telling you, but you need to be aware of it when you are trying to formulate your bid. And that's why it's going to be so important that you understand the different sections that we're going to talk about in the solicitation. Now, I've already given the definition here. So I normally like to see, for people who looked at a solicitation, what do you think a solicitation is? But here it is, right here in black and white, right? So since we only have an hour, we won't spend the time doing that. But solicitations are essentially the government's request for people to submit a response to solve their problem. They're willing to pay you, right? But they want to hear from you how you're going to address that issue. What's important to remember is what you see highlighted in red on this slide. Everything you need to formulate a responsive bid is going to be in the body of that solicitation. And if it's not, for instance, let's say the government issues a solicitation and they're looking for someone to clean windows in their building. In that solicitation, they may say that on a certain date, they are going to allow for a site visit. So for any contractor who is interested in coming for a site visit, if I want you to come to this building because I want someone to clean all of the windows in my building, on a certain date, there is a non-mandatory site visit, right? Which means if it's not mandatory, it means you can opt out of going, right? It's non-mandatory. If you went, you have the opportunity to see the windows, to see how large they are, whether they require a ladder to access them, because, is this building a gymnasium that has I'm old, y'all, so I don't know how old y'all are, but when I was in school, the gyms, the windows were like way up in the ceiling somewhere. You couldn't like practically just get to them and open a window, right? So what kind of building is it? Because the solicitation may not state. It may just say that a building located at this address, we need someone to clean all of the windows, and we're giving you an opportunity to come, but you're not mandated to come. If you're not mandated to come, then it shouldn't be something that disqualifies you, right?
Right.
However, if they don't specify how many feet up in the air the windows are, or how many windows are in the building, or how many, whether the windows are like the single panel type things that are in small homes, or whether they're like, 10 feet glass, plates in some kind of panoramic, building, then how do you find out? If it's not in the solicitation, and you don't go to a site visit, and you need answers to these questions to formulate a bid, and I just told you that everything you need to formulate the bid is in the solicitation, what do? That's probably a trick question for folks who have not started to look at solicitations. But the
And
answer
Montgomery says, ask.
Correct. And how will you ask, Adam? How will you know who to ask and how to submit that question?
Mm. All right, they're typing, I assume. And so while they're typing that, I want you to keep in mind, this is the $1 million question that people ask all the time. How do I know how to mark up quotes or bids? So Adam says the request for proposal will provide you that information for contact.
Absolutely.
And
so when
and
I
Viola
say
says
that
contact
everything
person is on a solicitation. Mhm.
right. So when I say that solicitation, the government always tells you everything you need to formulate a bid in the solicitation. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of your individual questions will be asked in the face of that document, but they will still tell you in that document how you can ask your individual questions, right? They'll
Mhm.
also tell you the deadlines by which all of those individual questions have to be submitted. The reason they do that is because it would seem like an unfair advantage if Adam sent that email and said, hey, I need to know all of this information about windows, because he knows how much he charges per square inch or something for cleaning windows, right? He knows what the industry standard is. He knows how to price. He just doesn't know how much glass he's actually having to clean and whether or not he needs additional equipment to access those windows. So if Adam were to send that information in as a question and receive that answer, but no one else received the answer, that might be considered to be unfair. The reason that the government publishes solicitations is because we're talking about tax funds, right? We're talking about government spending. The money the government is spending is our tax dollars generally. So they have to make sure that there is fairness in that process for the award. And so what happens is when you submit those questions, you have to have them in by a certain date, because what the government does is they take all of those questions, they formulate responses to those questions, and then they publish an update to that solicitation so that everyone who's planning to bid has access to that information. So if you don't remember anything else, if you've never looked at a solicitation before, and when we get into the next couple of slides, they will help you as you start to go through solicitations. Remember that you want to be responsive to that solicitation, and everything you need in order to be responsive and submit a responsive bid is going to be in that solicitation. Does anyone have any questions thus far?
Let me ask this quick question. Where can you find state requests for proposals or solicitations typically?
You can
Or
find
federal?
state or federal requests for proposals or solicitations. You're going to be able to find those in the on the website of the procurement office that handles that. So for the federal government, where I don't know who asked the question, but if you were in the presentation with the SBA probably talked to you about getting registered to do business with the federal government. And you have to be a registered contractor in SAM. SAM is an acronym for the System for Awards Management. And so the website for that is www.sam.gov. You can find those federal solicitation and opportunities for contracts are listed in SAM. You can find solicitations for contracting with the state at the state procurement website. And I believe I've already put it in the chat, and that Christina, Ms. Off was going to share that information with you. And so you can find opportunities to do business with the state of South Carolina at the state procurement website. And that website is procurement.sc.gov.
And then for the city, we have Bidline with the city of Charleston. And then you also have at the state level SCIBO. And so those are where there's school districts or their counties or their state, they all must publicize their solicitations. When they're spending federal, state, or local dollars, they must publicize these solicitations. So I'm old school. When I went looking for a job, I used to pull out the old Sunday newspaper and check out the want ads. So similar, I know we now go to the internet and Indeed looking for work or jobs. You need to go and visit these sites. Nobody's going to come and knock on your door to tell you that there's a solicitation for XYZ. You need to make sure that whether you're certified or you're registered in SAMS, you got to go do the work. It is just oftentimes tell people permission to go hunt for business.
Absolutely. And when she mentioned SCOBO, all
Skibo.
of the SCBO,
Yeah.
is what yeah. So when you all of that stuff, when you go to that South Carolina procurement website, there's a link for that portion, because those are contracts that are from municipalities and other things that are, like she said, school districts that are broken out. And then the state procurement stuff. So there's different links for all of them. They are all located at that procurement.sc.gov website. So you can get access to those online. You also have to be registered, just like you have to register to do business with the federal government. You have to register to do business with the state government. I'm certain that the city of Charleston has registration requirements for their
Yes.
contractors.
Mhm.
And so whether you're in Charleston or South Carolina or not, because I know that there are people who join these webinars from all over the place, out of state including, and not in the municipality of Charleston, you should contact the procurement office for whatever municipality or county you are in. Because even if you're registered with the city of Charleston, the county of Charleston may have different registration requirements, and they may list their contracts on a different procurement website. So
Right.
it behooves you to make sure that you contact the procurement office for each agency or each government office that you want to do business with, to make sure you are properly registered and to get familiar with their bidding process. The federal government's bidding process is likely to require a little bit more than the state. And for South Carolina, that is true in my experience. And then local and county governments generally require a little bit less than the state. So it is important to understand what is required in each jurisdiction, and it's important to make sure you're properly registered so that you can access that marketplace. Each of those agencies, each of those government agencies is a different marketplace. Okay.
And I have just a couple more questions and then you can move on. One says, are you available for assistance if needed?
Yes, this is what I do in my consulting firm. But if you can find this information by just contacting your state procurement office, usually the registration requirements are not that onerous. Usually they have folks in place like Ms. Jordan and Ms. Off who are there to assist you with getting registered. If you come to someone like me, folks like me charge, right? Most small businesses, especially when you're getting started, most nonprofits don't have huge budgets. And a lot of these things you can actually maneuver yourself. They don't require that much. Now, when you start formulating bids and stuff, sometimes you might want to get, some assistance with those types of things. But just getting registered and getting yourself in that system is probably something that most of us can do. If we're capable of running businesses, then we're probably capable of getting ourselves registered.
And then the last question we'll ask, and then we'll go on. Where do they post for petty cash under $25,000 contracts? I thought they only post contracts online when they're greater than $25,000.
So there are things, there is a such thing as a micro purchase, and micro purchases don't have to go through the same level of publication that larger contracts have to go through. And so they're not always posted. Sometimes you just have to have a relationship with that procurement office. For instance, I started my business in the county of Georgetown, in Georgetown County. Georgetown County has a small and disadvantaged business purchasing list. And so what the county does for those types of purchases is because they try to incentivize using, first of all, most governments, including the US government, prefers to shop with US providers, just like the state prefers to shop within state and local prefers to shop locally. So they incentivize local small businesses, particularly small and disadvantaged businesses, registering on this list, and they go directly to us. They say, hey, we need somebody to come in and shampoo the rugs. And they look on their list of people who are registered and who have identified themselves as people who provide these types of services. And they solicit directly to us on that list and say, please submit a bid, for this job, because we're already authorized providers in that county, and they know that we have the capability of providing the service. And so if any of us is available and interested, they go directly to us for those types of purchases instead of advertising. And um, a, a lot of contracts actually are awarded that way.
Exactly. So
So
that's why
once
it's
you get into the
important
game,
to get on those vendor registries list, whether it's with the county or with the city or the school district. And I will tell you, for here in Charleston County, particularly storm season is coming up, we have a lot of debris cleanup where they use P cards, which is credit cards, issue on the spot to clean up after storms. I mean, they could issue, they told me they could issue a check for $100,000 on a P card, an emergency cleanup. So, but you got to be on the vendor registries list. And like I said, just having information, but never going out and looking for work or getting registered. And it's free. Those are all free things to do. It doesn't cost you anything. So get on the vendor registries list, particularly for your county, whether your cities, your school districts, particularly for those set aside small contracts where they just basically, you got to have a relationship, because people go to who they know.
that is correct. So a lot of this is going to be about relationship building. When you get into the contracting game and you've been in it for a while, especially when you're doing federal contracting, you want to make sure that you have a capability statement. You probably heard about that from the SBA, but if you haven't, you can look it up and find out all about it. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, but it's important that you send out your capability statement and that you reach out to contracting officers, and that you let them know that you're in the area and that you make sure that you're properly registered so that they can see you in their system.
And so with the city, we don't do set asides. However, they are some counties that says, well, like Charleston County, they said if a contract's $25,000 or below, that they will compete that among the small business community. Okay, they don't do set aside, but they automatically said this contract is $25,000 below. They have to get a bid at least from what we said, small businesses or locals. So those particular contracts typically go to locals because there's no way that you can compete against a big Fortune 500 company and then me being a small company, because typically those companies will outbid me. So typically you do have what we call local preference, and then they compete within a group for those small business, small contracts as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so when we talk about solicitations, there are generally three types that you're going to encounter. The most common that you'll encounter, especially with the federal government, is likely a request for a proposal. What you need to understand about this is that this is kind of a means by which the government has told you the problem that they have. You submit a solicitation. You submit a proposal. So that is a request for you to submit a proposal. And you may have the opportunity, once you submit that proposal, they may look at your proposal and look at someone else's and think, okay, it looks like you might be better, but let me, there might be some negotiation that still needs to take place. And then so just submitting the proposal until the government actually accepts and signs is not actually forming a contract, and it allows for some negotiation for a request for a proposal. And so what we're going to do now is take a look at the different sections in a federal request for a proposal. This is where most people, when they actually start looking on SAM and pulling solicitations, this is where they stop. This is when people start looking at all the things that are in a request for a proposal, they usually stop because it's just voluminous and it's page after page after page after page. It's a lot of legal information in there where they quote the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which is quoted as the FAR, the FAR, which like quotes code sections and stuff that go over most people's heads. So I wanted to make sure that you understood when your homework after this, if you haven't already started to do so, is to go on sam.gov, to go to the state procurement website and even look at some of your local procurement websites and start to analyze these proposals so that you can understand them, because the only way you're going to be able to formulate a responsive bid to win a government contract is to make sure you understand how to go through this proposal. And so, as you can see, a request for a proposal for the federal government has a lot of sections, right? And each of these sections can be tens of, 20, 30 pages each, for each of these sections, just depending on how technical the contract is and the requirements that the government has. And so what I wanted to point out were some of the things that are highlighted. Of course, in section A, there's going to always be information in section A that you're going to need, because it is going to tell you, like, they're going to be specifically maybe the type of form that you need to fill out or something like that. But where most people, in order for you to know from looking at a federal request for a proposal whether or not you are even able to formulate a bid, I recommend that you go initially to section C, the statement of work, because this is really going to be where the government tells you exactly what they want. Now, don't get me wrong. It may be that the statement of work is 50 pages in and of itself, but it's where you probably need to start, and it's going to dictate most of your proposal. Okay. So this is what I recommend. I recommend you start with the statement of work. And then I recommend you look at section H. For instance, let's say the government needs services and you are a person who can provide those services. We're talking about the federal government. And the services themselves are kind of off-the-shelf services that almost anyone can provide, right? And you are capable of providing those services. You're properly registered. You've read the statement of work through and through. You know that you can can formulate a responsive bid. I recommend that you look at section H, because depending on where they need those services, there may be some special requirements. For instance, if you can only provide those services on a government compound that requires everyone have a top secret clearance to access certain facilities, and you need to access that facility to provide this basic off-the-shelf service, and you or anyone else in your firm have a top secret security clearance, are you able to formulate a responsive bid?
And again, that's a great question, and people need to be able to answer that, because if you can't get on base and don't have
if you can't get on base to do the work, can you be responsive to the requirements to get on base and do the work?
All right.
You can't stand at the gate and do it. You got to do it in one of these facilities. And there are certain facilities sometimes that you have to be able to access. For instance, just to access military compounds, there's generally a background check, right? We know there are a lot of agencies, believe it or not, I was a litigation attorney with the federal government, and I used to litigate labor and employment law when when civilian employees of the Army filed complaints of discrimination and all of those things under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And we had a case, and I used to defend the Army in these cases. There was a case where for those of you who may not be familiar, if you're an employee or an applicant for employment with the federal government, you're covered by Title VII, and you have the same rights as an employee to file a discrimination complaint. Well, we had a case where a would-be federal employee who had been given an offer of employment with the federal government for a job that would allow him access to a military base for the purposes of working in doing like a sanitation type stuff, where he would have to access areas where family and children live, because it was the type of work that he was doing. We had a contractor who won a contract, and the contractor he had to be a federal employee for this. So he was offered employment to work on the base to do this type of work where he would be unsupervised in areas where there were family and children. And he was a parolee. he was paroled from federal prison for the rape and murder of a civilian when he was a border patrol officer. He was convicted of raping and murdering a one of the individuals who came to the border. So the government then, after the background check came back, rescinded the offer for employment because due to the nature of the unsupervised work that he was going to be doing, he was going to be in an area where there were families and children, and he was going to be unsupervised in those housing areas. And because you also have to have a certain level of check to be unsupervised on a military base anyway, he wasn't able to access the installation, and he filed a complaint of discrimination. Now, if he had been submitting a bid and we said you had to pass a background check and you couldn't have certain types of things on your background check in order to access these areas, and he knew that those things were going to show up on his background check, would it have made sense for him to submit a bid, and would that bid have been responsive? No, right? Because you got to be able to meet the basic requirements in order to be able to access the workspace, right? And so the government will have requirements like that sometimes, and you and the folks who you intend to employ in those areas will have to comply. Otherwise, if you submit a bid and when they ask you to show that you can comply and you don't have proof that you can comply, you are not a responsive bidder, okay? This is
So
important
question came up
because,
quickly that
yes.
said, how do you get a clearance? Like if you, let's say you need to get all your employees background checks and so that they can get on the base or go work. How do you get clearance,
So-
they said?
So for general access to military installations, that's handled at the local security office. And so contractors, there's a process by which contractors go, there's paperwork that they have to fill out, they have to turn in certain information, and they do for general access to military installations, they do it by your driver's license usually. Like that driver's license, they do a scan, they have a system, it's called DBIDS. I can't remember what the acronym for DBID stands for, but it's some kind of ID system, defense something ID system, and it essentially runs a local background check with local law enforcement and make sure you're not like on the FBI wanted list or something like that. So it's very, very basic to access most federal compounds. That's how simple it is. But for anyone who's ever been in the military or for anyone who's been associated with the military, I got married on a military base. And so because I got married on a military base in a military chapel, my guests actually had to pass a background check in order to be put on the guest list so that they can come in and out of the installation unescorted. Now, I don't know about your family, but sometimes in my family, some people won't be able to get on that list. What that means is that a responsible person who is able to ingress and egress, usually someone who's an ID card holder for the military, can escort them on. So you can sign a person on. And so you can sign a person on, but you're responsible for that person and everything that they do on that installation during the time that they are your guest on that installation. So if you're going to be working with your contractors and y'all are going to be sitting in the same office and you're going to be looking dead at them, and if they have to go to the restroom, you're going to escort them to the restroom to make sure that they don't wander out of that restroom area and commit some atrocity on base, then you may have no issues as long as one of them is able to sign someone on as a guest. But generally, it's a background check, just a general security background check that's done through the local security office. But it's important to understand that this in a federal proposal, because as many of you know who have looked at it, who may not have even gone forward, there's a lot of information in these proposals. And so these slides will be available to you so that when you sit with a federal proposal, request for proposal now, you at least know, okay, these are what the different sections cover, and this is some of the information that's in here. And so if I have a question about something, I know where to go and I know where to look to see if I'm even going to submit a bid, okay? One of the other most common types of solicitations is going to be an invitation for a bid, and this is going to be one of the ones that is going to be most common here in South Carolina. And in an invitation for a bid, what they're really looking at is price. They're looking for the lowest price, usually lowest price technically acceptable. Those are terms you don't need to know for this, for the purposes of this class, but just know that price is a major factor. And when you submit an invitation for a bid, if the government accepts it, you're on the hook. That's a contract right off the bat. There's no negotiation back and forth about price and all of that stuff. If you submit trying to underbid just to get your foot in the door, thinking that you're later on going to be able to negotiate that price and then try to, get your margins up so you make some money, it's not going to happen. You're probably going to shoot yourself in the foot. So once you submit that thing, if the government accepts it, you're on the hook. Now you got to perform at that price. And so that's just something that you need to know. And I'm going to show you the sections for an invitation for a bid in South Carolina. And again, you can find these if you go to the state procurement website. Almost all of the solicitations that you might encounter on that website are almost, the majority of them are going to be invitations for bids. And I've highlighted section 3, which is the scope of work. Again, this is going to tell you what they're looking for. So if you want to know if you can submit a responsive bid, you got to know what it is they're looking for. Remember, you got to answer all the questions and address the issue that they have. And then information for offerers to submit is self-explanatory. They're going to tell you, hey, when you submit this, include X, Y, and Z. Include page 1 and 2. Page 1 and 2 is usually a standard form with information, administrative information that you have to include. It'll include, remember I told you you have to be registered to do business with the state. So it'll include things like your state vendor number, which identifies your company, because that's how they make sure that you're properly registered to do business with them and all of that stuff. And then section 5, qualifications of offerer. This is where they're going to evaluate to see whether or not you are someone that they believe can do this job. But again, it doesn't, you can see, it seems as many sections almost as the federal thing, and it can be a little daunting, but they're a lot simpler when you put them side by side. A federal solicitation is usually going to be a little bit more somewhat intimidating, and because it's usually going to have more technical stuff about federal regulations and things like that than the state. The state will mention state laws and and different things like that, but it won't be quite as cumbersome as a federal contract. Okay. Now, the last one that we're going to mention, we're not going to really talk about this one, is a request for a code or a request for information. It's not that we won't really talk about it. I'm going to talk about it because clearly I'm talking about it, but we won't have an example of it. But this is what I will tell you. It's not a binding contract. When you receive, usually these are not where you have seen it posted somewhere. Well, you can, they do post them. But in my experience, when you go through the SAM registration process for the federal government, and also with state and local governments, I've had this experience. When you are properly registered to do business with a agency of the government, when you register in SAM, there's a thing called NAICS codes, which is North American Industry Classification System codes. And these codes identify you by your industry. They essentially tell the government the types of services or goods that you provide. When you are properly registered and they are looking for companies, especially if they are considering doing a set aside for small business, they will usually search by NAICS codes for people who have identified themselves in SAM as within that set aside. So if they're looking for veteran-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, or some other type of businesses that are registered in a hub zone or something, they will look for that NAICS code and they will reach out to businesses that have self-certified in SAM that they are within one of these categories. And they will ask you sometimes, are you interested in this job? If so, please submit please let us know you're interested. They will say in the request for information a lot of times that they're not asking you for a bid right now. They just want to know if you're interested. A request for information allows contracting officers to determine whether or not they even have enough small businesses in that category who can provide the service, who are interested, to be able to set that contract aside for that category. Then if they determine that they have enough, because it's kind of a survey, it's kind of a way that they do market research. If they have enough, they may permanently set that requirement aside so that every iteration now that they do for that particular contract, it becomes a small business set aside. And then they will then after that say, okay, for all of you guys who are interested, now that we're ready to move forward, we know that we have people who can provide the service, please submit a proposal. And they will reach out to you directly for this. I have had this happen to me on numerous occasions. And in fact, this is how I have received some contracts. So please understand that it is important to be properly registered, just as important as it is to understand the solicitation, just as important as it is to be to be responsive in your bid. All of these things are how you win government contracts. Now, I'm just going to close with this slide. This is just how formatting your bid packet. This talks about some of the stuff that we covered on the other slide. We won't really go over it. You will see these forms. Like I said, you have homework after this. You need to start going and looking at these solicitations with these slides and paying attention so that you understand what's going on. But remember that if you do not answer a question that the government asks, it will lead to your bid being deemed unresponsive. You don't tell them, if you don't say, hey, I can provide this service, whatever they're looking for. If that's not what you're addressing in your bid, it's unresponsive. And that's one sure way to not get a contract award, okay? So if anyone has any other questions, I know that we're probably right up on time. Thank you so much, Ms. Jordan, for the reminder of the time. Like I said, I can talk sometimes, y'all, and so.
Well, I think we have a couple more questions.
Okay.
And I know people are just biting at the bits to hear these couple questions. And so when we talk about being non-responsive, and particularly requests for bids or invitation for bids. So when they tell you that the bid needs to be in at 12 p.m. to be at 823 Elm Street, signed in a brown envelope 8 by 11. What if I show up at 12:30 because I was late and they're still there? Can they accept my bid at 12:30? And
they
I put
cannot
it in
accept
an envelope.
I don't care how much they like you. I don't care how much they want to work with you. I don't care if you called them and told them that your car broke down. They can't accept. Remember, we talked about this being tax money, right? And we talked about the fairness to other people in the process. It would be unfair for them to have publicized that they're cutting off a bid at a certain time so that everyone else who knew that they couldn't get their bid in on time just didn't get to submit. But then you show up and they accept your bid. So they can't do that. That would be a grounds for anyone else in the process to protest because they didn't get the extra 30 minutes that you had to get their bid. Okay.
That's right. And then and again, that's all these little small nuances that people need to understand. You can come early, but you can't come late. If the cutoff is at 12 o'clock, has to be in a sealed envelope, 8 by 11, 14 by 15, they expect that to show up, particularly for sealed bids, So it's important that we are responsive, particularly for those particular sealed bids, because I've seen it happen. We have a couple other questions. Someone says, why do you need a business plan with SBA in order to procure a government contract? A business plan to procure a SBA contract. Not that I know.
I don't know if that was something that was discussed in your class with the SBA, but I will tell you this: if the contract is with the SBA and the SBA wants to see your business plan before they will give you, I know that before they will give you a loan, they require a business plan. I don't know about contracts with the SBA, but I do know this: if that agency, which is the agency that's going to give the award, tells you that this is a requirement, then guess what? That's why
They
you
have to
need it,
provide it.
because they require it. That's why. That's all I can tell you. So I'm not familiar with them requiring a business plan for a contract, but I do know that it is required to get an SBA loan.
Yes,
And if it is a requirement, just like in the solicitation, if the government says to you that you got to bring me 10 photocopies of your bid, well, I mean, why wouldn't 9 be? Because they need 10. And
That's right.
they're not going to consider your bid with just 9, which is one of the reasons why when I talked about going through the solicitation and I highlighted certain sections. So solicitations are time consuming. They take time to go through and they take time to prepare. And also, just like the solicitations are voluminous, sometimes your bid is going to be as voluminous because you're trying to get all of the information in there that they've told you have to get in there with a copy of the forms that they require. So this takes not only manpower, and most small businesses don't have huge staffs, but it also takes money if you cannot submit electronically, right? If you got a 40-page proposal, a bid proposal, and you have to submit 10 copies of that bid proposal to be responsive to that bid, it costs money, right? So right off the bat, you need to be able to go through and analyze, and hopefully these slides will help you, because you may know right off the bat, I don't even need to spend the resources that it would take, because there's no way I could be responsive to this bid based on the requirements to have a security clearance or something, right? So all of these things work together. It's a synergy. And unfortunately, if they tell you that it's something that you just have to have it in order to comply with their requirements.
Exactly. So again, we want to thank Ms. McClary for presenting today. Everybody, please give her a hand. I don't know about you, but I've learned a lot. We want to say thank you. I told you we're not out of information, just maybe out of time, but we'll be back here next Wednesday, same place, same time. You won the contract, now what? How do I get paid? How do I do contract compliance? So next Wednesday at 7 o'clock, we'll be here for our final session of the 4-part series. Now I won the contract, now what? How do I perform it? How do I make sure that I get paid at the end? There's nothing worse than having worked and don't get paid or get put off of a contract. And so again, we see all the great, much appreciated thank yous. So again, Danisha, thank you so very much for a job.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.
And again, I would like to see all of you all for our final session next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. I like to call it our 1 hour power, so that you will have the information, because information is power, so that you can grow your business, sustain your business, and be successful. So again, thank you. Deborah Hamilton says to all the panelists, thank you. Carol Rowe Williams says, thank you, with 2 thumbs up.